Hello and welcome back to the Finish More Music podcast. So it's been a while, right? It's been about 10 months now. And you may remember that the last 3 episodes were all about where the podcast had been. And then somewhat ironically, we got cut short and the podcast disappeared again. So first of all, let me very briefly explain where the podcast went, what happened, and why I'm choosing to explain it. So I'll keep it real brief. Last year, I lost two people who were incredibly important to me, center of the universe type people, the biggest influences on my life, who I love dearly. I lost them unexpectedly within the space of 2 months of one another. And Anna and I decided that we wanted to be with our families who were deeply affected by this. So we spent a period of time over in the UK with my family, and then a period of time over in Brazil with Anna's family. And that period of time, the length of it was 5 months that we were away from home here in the US. And then when we returned, it'd been such a whirlwind, unexpected, so much going on. And we put all of our focus, our time, our energy, our love into our families. When we got back, it was time to sit down and process what had happened ourselves. And then, of course, build the momentum back in our own lives. If you're 5 months out of your life and your routines, there's a process that takes place, right, in order to get things back up and running. So we got back somewhere like the end of September, I think it was, and then went through this process. And so I decided, right, we'll bring the podcast back in the new year. And here we are. The reason I wanted to just explain to you what had happened is the following. I receive a lot of messages about the podcast, and we had a lot of beautiful, heartfelt exchanges and deep discussions that I had with people who resonated with my story, and well-wishers and messages of support. And it was the most incredible thing. And I always endeavor to get back to absolutely every message that I get sent. In this instance, I decided just to focus on my family. And so I wasn't even checking the messages. I wasn't checking the emails, Instagram, Facebook Messenger, or any of those things. And so if you sent a message and I did not respond to you, it's important to me that you know, A, the reason why, and B, that you understand that you are important to me. I do not take lightly the investment of time that you put into even showing up to listen to the podcast, and especially to writing a message or to being vulnerable and reaching out about a topic and discussing things with me. I appreciate you massively. You're incredibly important to me. And I hope that you understand that in this instance, I literally just shifted all of my attention to my family. And so it's no slight on you. It's not me ignoring you or any of those things. And when we got back to the US and we started to build momentum towards the end of the year, I had a choice to make. Do I look backwards over the last 8 months and try and catch up on everything? Or do I draw a line in the sand and say, okay, let's start afresh and put all of my energy into serving people and building the momentum in our life and our business and all of these things? And I chose the latter. And that's basically how things played out. So if you sent me a message, I massively appreciate you. Please don't be put off from reaching out in the future. I hold very dear to me the conversations that I get to have with you. So I'm totally here for you going forward. And I would be very surprised if there's something like this, interrupts my life again in that manner that happens so suddenly. So that's where the podcast has been. Let's move our attention onto what's important now, which is where we're headed. You may remember we had the 3 episodes. If you haven't checked them out, I strongly recommend going back, because what I'm about to share in this episode is a profound breakthrough that is linked to that story. And I believe it will only land deeply for you if you followed the full thread of the story through. And that's my intention. My intention of sharing this is for this to land deeply for you. The breakthrough that I had really revolutionized my life. It's led to me leading a more expansive, fulfilled, creative, authentic life. And I know that as someone listening to this podcast, you are deeply invested in your music, in your creativity, in leading that expansive, joy-filled, bigger, more fulfilling, more authentic life. And so I'd love for this to land as deeply as it possibly can, because it's been completely life-changing for me. So we're doing something a little bit different as well. We've been out for the 10 months, and I thought, why don't we try something we've never done before, which is a podcast series. So we had the story that I was delivering over a number of episodes, but we haven't ever done like a condensed series where we go, here's an episode, here's an episode, here's an episode. So for every single day of the week, all 5 days, we're going to dive deep into this topic. I want to give this the time, honor, and respect it deserves, and give it every possible chance for it to really land for you, because there's a difference between hearing something and understanding it and really getting it on a deep level and it affecting you at the core of who you are. And that's what my hope is for the next 5 episodes. So super excited to be back. Thank you again for joining me. Thank you for your patience. Let's dive in. Okay, so let's start this first episode of the series. The series is called The Creative Calling, and let's start with a quick recap. So I won't go into detail. I'm just going to throw a few things out to jog your memory. And as I say, if you haven't checked out those 3 episodes that are called The Bigger the Breakdown Part 1, The Bigger the Breakdown Part 2, and The Bigger the Breakthrough, if you haven't checked those out, I recommend stopping this, jump back and listen to them. I promise it will be an investment of time that is worth it. So as a recap, the story was the story of where the podcast had been. And I discussed the kicking off point being me seemingly losing my mind, rocking backwards and forwards like a madman on the sofa back at my home in the UK, and how that all unfolded to me being diagnosed with clinical burnout, and how I came out the other side of that and thought I was in the clear. And what instead happened was I started this deeper and deeper and deeper decline into depression, and to a period of my life that almost ended me. It got very, very serious. And then in episode 3, we dived into this somewhat unique happening in which, at the depth of my depression, I also lost my hearing. Now, for anyone, losing your hearing is, of course, a traumatic and terrifying experience. When you stack that up on top of the depression, and you stack that up on top of the fact that that's how I make my living, that's how my team make their living, and I feel, of course, a deep sense of responsibility towards them, it was a really terrifying and challenging period. And then coming out the other side of that, there was one single conversation that changed absolutely everything with my mentor, James, that led to the discovery that I hadn't been listening to my intuition, and that I had lost this deep sense of who I really was. And so the conversation and that sort of moment that is just almost bizarre in a way how it happened was that I had told James prior to me losing my hearing that I hadn't been listening to my intuition. And then I lost my hearing, and we spoke several weeks after that happening, and I explained everything about losing my hearing, and he remembered. And he said, do you think this has got something to do with you not listening to your intuition? And this is a sign that you need to listen. By taking your hearing away, this is putting a flag in the ground saying it's time to listen. And I just instinctively, I knew it. It sent a chill down my spine. It'd been almost a throwaway remark before, and yet he'd linked it together. And it was like, this is exactly what got me into this deep, dark place. And this is what I need to do to reverse this. I need to listen to my intuition. I need to pay a deep sense of gratitude. And again, this is all unpacked much more in detail in those 3 episodes. But a deep sense of gratitude for everything I've got. It's so easy for us to take for granted, right? Things like our hearing. But when that was taken away, my gosh, did I focus on it. And I had that realization not to take anything for granted. So I was practicing this deep sense of gratitude for even breathing. And I still do to this day. Yes, I have a daily practice of gratitude that I do, but also in these moments of awareness, even now I'm talking about it. So I'm aware, I'm feeling so grateful that I get to share this message, that I get to speak, that I get to breathe, that I get to move. There are plenty of people out there who are not able to do those things. And so I practiced this deep sense of gratitude. I started listening to my intuition, and I vowed to go on this sense of discovering who on earth I was now, because I'd been doing so many things in my life that were really for other people. Or, and this is an important distinction, I was doing it because I thought they wanted something. They wanted me to behave in a certain way, or to do a certain thing, or to say things in certain ways. And so I was living myself for other people, or what I imagined they wanted me to do. And I vowed to actually discover who I was authentically. And the call was a revelation for me. And from that day forwards, I haven't and I didn't experience another episode of depression. It was like the click of a finger. It just went away. And then here's the really almost woo-woo spiritual mad thing about this. Every medical professional that I'd seen, I'd gone through the NHS, I'd gone private to multiple different professionals, really, really top ENT specialists. And they had all said, no, this is gone permanently. We've done the tests, you've taken the steroids, you've done all of these different things. Your hearing hasn't returned at all. It's done, it's gone. And I'd gotten complete with that. But when I started to live my life in this way that I promised on that call I would live it, 2 weeks later, and it was a gradual process, my hearing returned. And so it was this mad experience. And that's where we left the story off. Now, what I didn't know was that actually there was a deeper, more profound reasoning behind going into the depression, of what I believe really happened, that I hadn't quite fully understood there, but I discovered in the coming year. And that's what we're about to talk about, and I'm going to share with you now. So let's pick up that story. I get off of the call, and we had put in the calendar that we were going to do our free Finish More Music workshop, which is really intensive. If you've been a part of it before, you'll know it's these, really highly recorded, well-edited videos, me teaching about creativity and music, and it's this free program that we put on. It lasts for about 10 days with lots of PDF downloads and roadmaps and all of this cool stuff, and it's completely free. It's an end-to-end experience. And then for anybody who loved it and wants to dive deeper and wants to join the Finish More Music community, we open up the doors for enrollment for a short period to let those people jump in if they want to. So it's a very intense period of time, and it was put in the calendar, but we were thinking it's not going to happen, because I at that stage was barely getting out of bed in the morning. I didn't want to do anything. I had no interest. Everything felt hopeless and pointless all of the time to me. But now there was a new version of me. And as Anna coined the term, Keith 2.0. And so I had the energy, and we said, let's go for it. And if things start to feel too heavy, we can just pull the plug on it. It's not the end of the world. It's free training at the end of the day. But I was just invigorated. I was alive. The depression had gone. Every morning I woke up, it wasn't there. Was it coming back? No. And then I got the certainty. It's not. This is good. Everything is wonderful. And I was practicing the gratitude. I was doing all of these things. The one thing that I didn't really have time for in all of that was the rediscovering who I was piece. Yeah, absolutely. The coaching, the teaching, the training, it's always been me. I love it. I thrive on this. So I knew that was a part of me. But the other pieces I didn't have time. And here we go. Universe interject again. 2 months after that call with my mentor, we had our flight booked to move to America. So pick up our entire life and move it to the US. And as anyone who's moved house will know, there's a lot of packing your stuff up. In this instance, we'd moved before. Rather than us just chucking stuff in boxes or leaving them in the boxes where they were in the attic from the last time we moved, we were really conscious. We don't want to carry all of this stuff to the US. It, for a start, be a nightmare. And number two, what a brilliant opportunity for a fresh start. So we were going through every box. We were looking at absolutely everything that we had and making that decision. Is this something that goes to charity? Is it something to sell? Does it go in the skip? Or does it form this really very, very small collection of items that we are going to have shipped over with us to our new country of residence? And what happened in amongst that was, of course, we had to go up in the attic. And what did I find up in the attic? Me. In the attic were all of these things that I loved doing. Things that when I did them, I was engrossed in. Time would just fly by. I was so engaged in doing these things. There were Dungeons and Dragons things from my youth, and I remembered how much I loved that. There were these little miniatures from Games Workshop, if you're familiar with it. And I used to build them and paint them very intricately. I actually became really good at it. I was almost in awe of how good some of these things were. I was like, wow, I invested so much time and love and passion into doing this. I haven't even looked at it for decades. And it wasn't that I'd outgrown it. It's just that I'd somehow forgotten that part of me. And then as life became busier and busier, I started suppressing things. So I love gaming. I love the PlayStation. I wouldn't pick up the controller because I'd feel guilty. I'd feel that I should be spending time with my wife or working on the business or coaching or doing something. There was this burden of totally irrational guilt that I was putting myself under. I wouldn't pick up a PlayStation controller. I'd stop reading books unless it was personal development or growth, which is all awesome and something I love. But I'd stop reading books by authors like Stephen King, who I'm absolutely, crazy for his books. And I was like, do I still love reading these books? Might I still love painting this? Might I still love watching fantasy movies? And by that I mean, Lord of the Rings, things like that. Let's put a clear delineation in what I'm talking about there when I say fantasy movies and sci-fi movies, all things that I'd traded off because it's not Anna's bag. She doesn't like watching those things, so I would never watch them. Like, what would happen if I started to integrate these things back into my life? I wasn't really working out much, and yet I love it. Like, picking heavy things up and putting them back down, like, that lights me on fire. So sue me. That's my thing. I was, always interested and always loved doing it. But I'd stopped doing all of these things. And so the question immediately became, what if I start integrating those things back into my life, as well as doing new things, exploring new things I've never done before? So all of that is to say that there was no time to do that right now. We had to unpack, and chuck away and clear the house and all of those things. We had all of the enrollment going on. Then I spent 3 days in London with my mastermind group in the studio. Then we did a 2-day live marketing in the industry live event that we ran. Then we had the Finish More Music meetup where members come from all around the world to hang out together. And 2 days after that meetup, we were on the plane to the US. So there was no time to integrate any of these things into my life. And of course, the same was true when we arrived here in the US. We had to find a home, buy a home, furnish a home because we weren't really bringing anything with us. And do the full shebang, learn the laws, how things run, set up the business. So much to do that the year flew by, and it was amazing and it was exciting and it was invigorating, and I was practicing my gratitudes and I was leaning into my intuition to make calls on things and, not holding myself under duress to having to get it right, just going with what felt right in the moment. But it got to the end of the year and I had that realization, hang on a minute. The year's gone by and I haven't honoured what I said in this call and what felt right to me, that I had to do it. And I had no desire to leave even the smallest opening, not even the tiniest slither of a crack for me to go back into depression. Not even the tiniest slither of a crack. And I was convinced that I had to honour this path of finding out who I really was now and what lit me up to do it. So I spoke to Anna about it, and Anna being Anna, she's just so supportive. She's unbelievable. She said, well, why don't you take a break? You were working this really huge, heavy workload for years. Then you burned out. Then you went through depression. Then you recovered, and we had this crazy period of time moving countries and all of that. You've not had a rest. How about you just take a step back? And I was like, well, how on earth am I going to do that? And she said, stop recording the podcast for a start. And I was like, I don't know about that. I hadn't missed a beat in 4 years, an episode every single week. It felt like just the thing that I did, and that I ought to be doing it and I should be doing it. And I did want to do it. I love doing this. I love recording the episodes. And I said as much to Anna. I was like, I love doing it, and I don't want to break that chain. You know, you do something every week for 4 years. Like, that's quite the chain to stand by and be proud of. And certainly I was. And Anna said, well, what else are you going to step back from? What else are you going to step back from? And I thought about it. It's not going to be the coaching. It's not going to be the teaching. I'm not going to be out of integrity to the people that I serve. So if it isn't social media, the marketing piece that goes with that, and the podcast, what is it? And the answer was, it's going to have to be. If I really am going to honour this, it's going to have to be the podcast and all the social media stuff. And so that is where the podcast went. We've got to this point now where we've discovered why the podcast disappeared, because it was running for the entire period when I was going through the depression and everything else. I was still dragging myself into the studio and making it happen. If you remember, one of the things that sustained me was this idea that if I can help just one person, just 1%, to not feel like I feel, or to be even traveling in this direction, that is worth me putting one step in front of the other. And now it was a case of, well, actually, let's get to that point where I feel I can't possibly go back there, and I'm reinvigorated and I've got even more to give, and let's honour what went on this call. And so that's what happened for that next year, which I think, if memory serves me correctly, had been 2023. I think that sounds right. Yep. I went to all these different seminars. I flew around the country here in the US, attending personal development seminars, personal effectiveness. I did 6 days at this huge event with Tony Robbins, 15 hours a day, bouncing around like a lunatic. Incredible event. I invested in coaches and mentors and all sorts of things. And I tested out these things. Do I still like doing this? It turns out, yeah, gosh, give me a Stephen King book and I'll devour the thing. And what about music? Do I want to actually write music for myself? Because for years, I'd just written it from a place of it's for a course, or it's to teach somebody something. It's something else that's getting added in the community, or it's a masterclass I'm going to teach. There'd always been, I'm doing this to get somewhere. And the idea of just sitting down, doing something from a state of being and a state of doing it for the joy of it and the love of it, as I said, this kind of guilt, this pressure, I'd always seem to put myself under it. So it's like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get back into the weights, kitted out a room here at home as a gym. And I started doing all of these different things. And absolutely, I started to feel on fire, energy levels even higher. And then, and here we go again, the universe stuff. And then I chanced across this podcast that ties every single thing together. And this is what we're doing in this particular episode. This is where I'm sowing the seed of where we're going for the next 5 episodes. I was on YouTube, and I get served this random podcast, just nothing to do with anything I'd been searching for or looking up in any way. And it's not a big podcast. It's not a Diary of a CEO, Modern Wisdom, those kind of podcasts. Certainly not a Joe Rogan-esque podcast. Just some real niche guy doing his thing. And it was with this Jungian psychiatrist, I think that's the correct word. And for whatever reason, I just felt compelled to watch it. And it was this guy, James Hollis, who's the Jungian psychologist, and he unpacked the full piece, everything that had happened to me basically, and everything that was lighting me up now, and gave me a clear direction on what to do. And what he uncovered for me was something that's called the Numinous. Okay, let me say that again, the Numinous. And here was one of the pieces that he said. He said that in his opinion, 90%, if not all cases of depression are caused by people not following their Numinous. In his opinion, very well respected guy. I've looked him up since. He's very, very good. And I was like, well, this is really interesting. What is this Numinous? So here's what it is. Numinous comes from the Latin verb that means to beckon or be summoned. It is something that calls us. Now, when I started researching it, this has been considered a mystery that's been spoken about since ancient times, and it's ineffable. Ineffable means that it can't be reduced to a concept and it can't be explained in words. Now, I realise that puts me in somewhat of a predicament when I'm recording a podcast and the only thing I have is language to convey this. But really, it's not a predicament because you know what it is like to be called to something. You know that feeling that something has stirred your soul, that you have got this maybe thread, something that's been in the back of your mind for a while that just attracts you to doing something. And for many of us, we suppress it. We fail to give it any kind of priority, even though it calls to us. And this can be something that's quite, say, small, but something that isn't on the grandiose scale of, let's say, a vocation. So a vocation is a strong feeling of suitability for a particular career or occupation. Strong feeling, a calling towards. But it can also be music or art. Something that you hear that and you're just like, God, I love this. Like when I first got into music, I was 10, 11 years old and I hadn't been attracted to music very much growing up whatsoever. In fact, it often aggravated me because it was my mum listening to the top 40 in the UK on BBC Radio 1. It wasn't music I was into, and it always signified the end of the weekend and that I had school the next day. So I kind of had a bit of a love-hate relationship, or a more of a sort of ambivalent hate relationship with music. And then my brother, who's 11 years older than me, was going to all the early raves in the UK, and he bought a cassette tape back, and my first real exposure to proper underground electronic music. And all of a sudden I was hooked. I was called to it. So you'll know what it's like to just be drawn towards something and not know why. And it is something that is calling your soul. It's beckoning you. It's external to you. Now, it is different to intuition, and I think this is an important distinction for me to make, because I've spoken at length now about following my intuition and how important that is, and that is absolutely true. There is a distinction between the two. Intuition is this gut feeling inside of us that something is the right choice or the wrong choice, or the right place to stay or the wrong place to stay. There is just this feeling that tells us one direction or another in that instance. So I think best explained if I give you an example. Way back when, decades back, aging myself, something chronic here. Decades back, my mates and I, we used to go out raving every single weekend. Sometimes in the middle of the week. If there was a rave on, we would go to it. We'd jump in the motor, someone would drive, and we'd go party like lunatics at these all-night raves, come back exhausted, get up, try and do it all again the next day. And we did it every weekend for several years. And there was this one Saturday, and I was getting ready, and I got out of the house, and I was walking to my mate's place where we were all going to get together for a bit before we jumped in the car. And I just started to get this intuition, this gut feeling, don't go out tonight. Something's not right. Don't get in the car tonight. Something is not right. And I spoke to another of the lads there, a guy, Beetle Dave. Everyone had nicknames back then. We had a tall Lee, a short Lee, a sorted Lee, so called because at one of these raves they had a face painting thing and he got sorted written on his forehead, and so he forever became known as Sorted Lee. And Beetle Dave was into Beetle cars. He liked doing them up. He had one, and so did one of his friends, another Lee actually. So it was four Lees we had. And he said to me as well, I'm really not feeling it tonight. Something feels off. Anyway, he went and I made the call, I'm not going. And everyone was, come on, let's go out, Millsy, let's go and party. And I was just like, I'm not feeling it, guys. And anyway, on the way to the rave, the driver clipped a roundabout and rolled the car, and they were in a car accident. Now, fortunately, none of them were seriously injured. Bruises, scratches, very shaken up, of course, as you can imagine. But that's what intuition is. It's just, you get that sense, right, to do this thing or to not do it. It's different to the numinous. It's different to being called, to be beckoned to something. You kind of had this sort of thread, this through line, this thing in your life for a long time that keeps saying, I should try this. Like, I feel drawn to doing this. And as I say, it can be as big as like a vocation, which is different from a career. A career is something that we can be in, but we don't have this strong feeling of suitability to it. Even if we're good at it, it doesn't mean that we feel it's our life's purpose or calling in some way. A vocation adds that piece in. Or it could be something that you're going to do as a hobby, something for the love of it. And you're calling one of them, because there can be many, of course, but you're listening to this podcast because it's music, it's expression, it's creativity, it's doing those things, the things that light you up. When we talk about vocation, my calling, I've come to realize, and I think it was one of the reasons I'm drawn to coaching and the podcast all along, but didn't really know it. My calling is to help you follow your calling. It's crystal clear to me now that I've taken time to reflect on this. And this is the thing, we only get one life. We've got one shot at it on this planet to either go all in and follow the things that light us up and that we feel called to, or to stifle and suppress and put them off and kick those cans down the road. Now, I take you back to what the price of that is, or what the price of that can be. Sorry. As James Hollis said, 90%, if not all cases of depression, he believes, are because people are ignoring their various callings, the things that make them them, the things that light them up to pursue it. They're denying their soul. They're creating a deep wound to their soul. And he used this phrase which really stuck with me. He said, people can survive for decades with the lights being out, with the fire being out, the fire in their belly, their enthusiasm for life being extinguished because they constantly resist or put off or ignore these things that call them. And here's this incredible quote that is from Carl Jung himself. The spirit of evil is the negation of the life force by fear. Only boldness can deliver us from fear. If the risk is not taken, the meaning of life is violated. The meaning of life is violated by failing to pay attention to and to honour these callings. They are things that are worthy of our commitment in life. By failing to honour those, the meaning of life is violated. And it's easy to do these things. As I said, I spent so much of my time living a life that I thought other people wanted me to live, instead of paying attention to what I was called to. So you can see now how that piece of the puzzle comes into place as being really the overarching storyline throughout the entirety of this. And so then comes the question, well, how did I utilize that information? I spent more time meditating, more time in stillness. I wrote down a list of those threads, those things in my mind that have always said to me, follow this, do that thing. And I started to do those things. I went through the things that I'd left behind, or the things that I felt called to but wasn't doing because of this bizarre sense of guilt, the pressure that I was piling on myself. I started doing those. And the more I did these things, and the more I discovered this is what I love doing, and I feel called to this and I'm going to do it, the more enriched my life became. And here's the amazing thing about this. If you agree with this, if this is resonating with you, if you know on some level that what I am saying is true, and you know what the numinous feels like in you, and I'm sure you do, and you see the importance of honoring it and valuing it, then it becomes non-negotiable. And if it is non-negotiable, then of course you build your life around it. It doesn't become the thing that is on the fringes, on the outside, on the outskirts of one's life that we fit in if we can, or we ignore, or we get guilty about. It becomes the thing that we design our life around. And I'm not saying we all get to just, chuck the baby out with the bathwater and stop what we're doing. And we'll discuss this more in future episodes of how to follow your calling and live this authentic life. However, it starts to become a non-negotiable cornerstone. And when I did that, when I started to fit as many things in as I possibly could into my day that were my calling, and ask those questions, how do I move this more to what I'm called to? How do I modify this? How could I change this? What could I do here? Wow, my creativity flourished, my energy levels flourished. When you're doing things that you're called to, your energy goes through the roof. And let's not get confused here, because I know it could be easy to listen to this and say, I'm called to music, but I really struggle with it. It's hard, it's difficult, it's challenging. I feel resistance, I feel fear. I overwhelm myself by buying plugins and watching too many YouTube tutorials and buying bits of hardware and tying myself in knots with different workflows and all of those things. No one said that following your calling would be an easy path. In fact, for some people, it's been their entire life's destiny, and it's been one of struggle and difficulty, but worthiness for them. But also it's true that if all of these things are blocking creativity and getting in the way and you're called to it, the simple question to ask, is it more painful to try to write music or to walk away from it? When I'm not trying, when I'm not in the endeavor of it, is that more painful? Because I'd suggest that you then know, yeah, for sure, this is my calling. And yes, there are all these hurdles and challenges, and these can be unpacked. We can dismantle those. We can get rid of them. It's still going to be challenging sometimes. It's creativity, of course. But all of the unnecessary overwhelm and the noise and the mess that we can build around it, that can be removed. And of course, one is not following their calling if one is buying hundreds of plugins when their calling is to express themselves creatively. Something worth thinking about, I think. So this idea of the numinous, I think there's a lot of value if you align with this in taking some time to write down what are the things that you know that you feel called to. Taking time to walk in nature and be quiet, or to meditate, or just to sit quietly and see what comes up for you, and get a list of these things down. There'll be some things you know for sure right now. There'll be some things that maybe have been at the back of your mind that will now come more to the front. And then you can consider how to incorporate those into your life. So going forward with this series and with the podcast, we're going to be focused, of course, on the calling of creativity, self-expression, music, and all of the things that we've covered before, but very much through this lens of my calling being helping you to explore, to live an authentic life, to follow your numinous and to follow your calling. So going forward, the next 4 episodes, we'll dive into that, and we'll importantly dive into some of the challenges. There are 2 really big, bold challenges that will push back, that will try to prevent you from following your calling, that will lead to living a small, unexamined, stifled, claustrophobic life. And as you can imagine, I've researched these things and figured out how I get past them, and I'm going to share that with you as well. So this is the first episode in our series, The Creative Calling. I hope you've enjoyed this and found some inspiration in it, and that it's helped you and given you something to reflect on. In the next 4 episodes, we're going to dive into this even more deeply, look at the obstacles, the barriers, and how you can overcome them to live a more creative, expressive, authentic life. Until then, see you soon.